Hi gaming guys, and so we've got another special projects replica style build for you today, and this time it's a slightly different replica than what I'd usually do. This is a replica of a racing model, but it's actually based on the road-going homologation version of said racing car. It's the Nismo R33 Le Mans race car, which raced in the 1995 and 1996 Le Mans, if I remember correctly. And it lost only to the McLaren F1 itself, so a pretty decent result for the Skyline. Overall, it's pretty much the perfect endurance race car because of the reliability and how forgiving it is on the driver. But basically what I've done with this replica is I've taken the road-going version of the Nismo LM and turned it into the racing version. It has the exact spec that the car had when it was featured on Gran Turismo 1 and 2. As far as I'm aware, it hasn't been featured on any other Gran Turismo games since then. You can kind of make a replica of it with the R33 touring car, but it's not as accurate as the road car, ironically. And also the road car, funnily enough, handles better and is actually faster overall for its PP. So, as far as the visual tuning, all I've done to this car is fitted the 5-spoke gold rims, just to make it look a little bit more like the racing model. And apart from that, unfortunately, there's nothing else you can do visually on this car. So, we'll go straight over to the mechanical garage for the tune setup, and then take it out to the Le Mans to see how it drives. So, as I mentioned, I've built this car to pretty much the exact spec that it had when it was featured on Gran Turismo. On Gran Turismo 1, which I was fortunate enough to purchase recently, you can buy it straight from the dealership as the race car. Whereas on Gran Turismo 2, you have to buy the road-going version, funnily enough, which is what we've done here. And then back on Gran Turismo 2, you were able to turn it into the racing model by fitting a race modification for about 80,000 credits or whatever it was. What's with that, Polyphony? Get that back in the game. That was so cool. We need that back on Gran Turismo to turn the road cars into racing cars. Come on, get on that, seriously. But anyway, for the spec on this particular model, it doesn't have the exact spec of the real car. Of course it doesn't. It has more power than the real thing, blah, blah, blah. But we've built it to the Gran Turismo spec, so it's kind of nostalgic as well. So I've gone for racing soft tyres. For the brakes, I've increased the rear balance to 6, just to keep it more straight and controlled under braking. You don't have to do that, though. And if you do choose to use that, and like me, have your ABS set very low, only on 1, or even none at all, you do want to be a little bit cautious of brake lockup. As far as the suspension, we've got the ride height as low as possible, front and rear. We've increased the springs to 1650 and 1350, the dampers to 5, anti-roll to 6, camber on 2.5 with neutral toe. I would recommend doing the gearbox last, so we'll come back to that. For the gearbox, you want your lowest initial torque, highest acceleration, and a braking sensitivity of 10. As far as the power, we do have an oil change, and I wanted to build it to the spec of the old race car, so 690 horsepower, according to old Gran Turismo logic. So your stage 3 engine tune, your high RPM turbo. The mid-range does give you more power, but this is of course a Le Mans model, so the high range works a little bit better. And your power limiter set down to 690 horsepower. You can of course fit NOS, but it's not really an accurate replica if you do. Thankfully, we have very impressive amounts of downforce on this one. You want the full weight loss package, and then an 86 kilo ballast, which I've put all the way to the front to bring us down quite nicely to the 585 pp level, and also to bring us up to the weight, according, again, to Gran Turismo logic, of the real car. Now, 61-39 weight split seems to be a bit awkward, but trust me, it handles incredibly well despite that. Now, as I said, as far as the gears, I would recommend doing the gears last, especially if you change any of your power upgrades, and this goes with any car, because once you change your power upgrades, if you come back to the gearbox, even if you haven't touched it before, and then click reset to default, you'll notice that the gears all change, even though you hadn't adjusted them. And that's because the power of the engine, the revs of the engine, etc., dictate what gears you can use. So I would recommend, as I said, doing this last. Reset this to default, come up to your auto setting, click it all the way up to 261, then you want to give it a gearbox flip of 5, then come back to the auto setting, click it down and upper peg back to 261. Then you'll be able to get these individual gears of 2.7, 1.8, 1.3, 1, 800 and 625. You don't actually use 6th on this car very much. It's kind of just a draft gear, so you can actually put that a little bit higher if you want to, and then bring your final drive down to 4.7. So that's it for the replica tune for this car. Now let's take it out to the Le Mans and see if it lives up to the racing model. Now, the beauty, as I mentioned earlier, of the Skyline is how forgiving it is for the driver. And one of the ways which that has benefit is in tuning. So even though I've given you the rough guide on how to replicate the racing model, I would encourage you to change it around to suit your own needs. You can actually reduce the camber, you can set your anti-roll a little bit lower, you can even reduce the downforce virtually as low as it can go, and the car is still very, very forgiving, despite no longer being all-wheel drive. Now, with the maximum downforce, you can get up to speeds of around 190 on Lasarte with the chicanes. With the lowest downforce setting, obviously the cornering is a little bit inferior. I say inferior, but as I said, it's still a very forgiving car. And your top speed will be over 200 then, if you reduce that downforce. Now, at the 585 pp level, you're not really going to be taking on incredible racing cars, so it actually sits really well. Despite the top speed not sounding that impressive, at the 585 pp level, that actually places it pretty well against the kind of speeds that racing cars will be able to do when restricted down to 585, or just going up against road cars. Overall, I actually did build a replica based on the R33 touring car to see if it would be any better than this, having all-wheel drive, being a premium, etc., and of course already a racing model, but it was actually inferior, because that car sat at 600 pp with the same spec, and was only about 1 or 2 seconds quicker. It had roughly the same top speed with the lowest downforce setting that this car does with the highest downforce setting. So in other words, this car is superior to the touring car. So, if you decide to use this replica of the iconic Le Mans Racing Skyline, obviously I hope you find it fun, and that it certainly is, and also competitive for Le Mans racing. And if you'd like to keep up with other replicas and also custom builds like this on the channel in the future, be sure to click that subscribe button down below. And as always, thanks for watching.